The story starts off with our mutant resistance gathered seemingly in an ongoing final stand for their survival. As they prepare to fight, they tell stories of how they all came to be there and how much they lost and sacrificed along the way. The first story recounts the origin of Basilisk. This reality is Cyclops. Here, Basilisk was a prisoner held at Alcatraz. There, mutants are basically held on death row, sentenced to die just for existing. In Basilisk's case, he wasn't actually on death row, or wasn't really on death row in the same way. Instead, he actually acted as their executioner. Arcade, who runs the prison, basically ordered to have Basilisk's eyelids removed and created a visor with their own controller so that the prison could use him to exterminate the other mutants. Fortunately, Basilisk managed to use the controller to unleash his powers himself, using them to kill all the guards and Arcade, who ran the prison. While he told the other prisoners to flee, Basilisk stayed on, prepared to stand and fight. No one really knows fully how he escaped. Also, yes, if you haven't caught on, Basilisk is Scott Summers in this reality. We also learn the story of Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, and Paige Guthrie, aka Husk. After their family was rounded up, they managed to evade capture and tried to track them in transport trucks. However, by the time they did catch up with the guards who were moving them, it was already too late. It seems their folks were not actually captured alive, but instead were killed in the ensuing chaos. Husk swears revenge on the people who took her family from her, and Cannonball attempts to subdue his sister, instead offering that they build a place that they can call home. We also learn of the Doctor's backstory. Dr. Rao is a human, it's true, but she chooses to stay with the mutants after her own people turned on her when she stood up against leaking a cure for the X gene into the water supply. Wolverine was tasked with stopping the leak from happening, and Rao revealed herself as his informant. She helped to destroy the cure by administering the only dosages that they had left, a small batch, into him, so his healing factor could basically metabolize it. The only way to actually destroy the cure on short notice, as there were reinforcements en route to the lab. However, when Wolverine asked afterwards to be killed as the cure had suppressed his healing factor, causing the poisonous adamantium coating on his bones to take effect, Rao refused. After fighting back against one of her former colleagues in the lab and killing him, she couldn't bring herself to take another life. I mean, after all, she is a doctor. She blames herself for much of what has happened to the mutants, as she was one of the scientists who worked to remove their X gene, whether they wanted it or not. Well, initially it was because people said they wanted it, but then they were wanting to take that cure and give it to people forcibly. She was like, wait a minute, it's not what I thought we were doing. Next, we learn of how Magneto became the leader of this resistance. Toad in this universe is the one who takes us into this story. He recounts a time when the last of the mutant resistance were basically holed up in the Chrysler building. They believed that Magneto had perished, but he and Mystique managed to infiltrate their way into this final stand, putting themselves between the human forces and the mutants that were left there. While non-ferrous exonyms, this world's version of Sentinels, were on their way, Magneto simply told the forces that if they stood down, none of them would actually need to be harmed. You see, his plan was to simply save and relocate his people that were holed up there, which he did by literally moving the city's buildings using his powers. Well, not all of them. But that obviously kind of became the legend. He moved all the ones with enough steel in them for him to actually manipulate them and move them with his powers, with the buildings flying right over the malicious heads. Wow. What a sight. What an epic moment. Magneto becoming leader, just being like, gonna move all these buildings. 1,000 days after all the last surviving mutants came together, seeing the buildings as a beacon and gathering to Magneto's side, the fight continues on. It's been almost 3 years, and every day is an intense battle. We learn that Magneto, as leader of the last surviving mutants, has his own elite force, his own version of the X-Men, seemingly. Prominent members among them include Cannonball, who seems to be the team's tactical leader in this reality, and Legacy, the name Rogue chooses to go by in this reality. However, there is another name for Rogue here as well that she doesn't so much like, the Reaper. Now, this is because when mutants die, as Tempo does here, Legacy absorbs the mutants into herself, killing them by draining their life force with her touch, but also using her powers to absorb their own mutant abilities and their memories, so they will always live on. So when mutants are on their deathbed, rather than just die as they would, Rogue gets to basically keep them within her, and so their memories things continue on. I really love this approach for Rogue's character. I gotta say, I already love what they did with Pixie in this reality. Instead of looking fairy-like, has dragon-like wings. There's just a lot of cool versions of characters. Basilisk too, super cool. After the battle is done, the Force Warriors arrive and rebuild the barriers that were destroyed, as they are destroyed every day, of course, before the battle ends up happening. This group is a team of 5 elite mutants who are kept mostly off the battlefield and focus purely on rebuilding defenses each and every day. Sound familiar? Kinda sounds like a group that may have helped to inspire the 5 of Krakoa from the modern day main continuity. Among the Force Warriors ranks are David Haller, Hellion, Betsy Braddock Psylocke, Carmella Uncione, Standoff, and finally Rachel Summers Revenant. As most people fall back to the fortress to unwind after the long, hard day of fighting, we get to look at what their relationships are like. Storm is with Namor in this reality, both bonding over being basically godlike monarchs. Cyclops' Basilisk is with Frenzy. Iceman and Psylocke are an item in here. The other thing we learn is that Wolverine can no longer fight, as using his powers will actually trigger a bomb within him, which is full of the X-Gene cure that Rao once worked on. But apparently, he did survive up until this point, so hey, that's something. I honestly wasn't expecting that after we got the story of how he basically gets captured after trying to remove the X-Gene cure. We also learn a bit of the world, and how the Phoenix losing control is basically what triggered this reality. At least that's what it seems so far. Gambit and the other mutants think back on old times and what their lives were like before the war broke out. Some wonder if they would have ever been friends had they come together without the unifying cause of mutant survival, or if things could have been different if they had come together earlier. Gambit, however, doesn't believe that what happened here is unavoidable, even if the mutants had come together before. Interesting considering the history we know from Earth 616. Previously as well in Toad's story about how Magneto saved all the mutants who were in the Chrysler building, we also learn of how the humans at one point attempted to trick mutants into gathering at a fake safe house in Westchester, but how this was a trap and the safe house was burned down with all the mutants who came to find refuge there supposedly still trapped inside. Sound familiar? Sounds familiar. Woo! That's a interesting take on that. While Legacy is taking her time to return to the fortress, called onto the field for Tempo's last rites and still processing all the memories she just took in, it's revealed that the barrier has actually had a breach. The breach, however, was not a human team seemingly attempting to infiltrate Magneto's fortress, but instead was another mutant. One that has been kept as an inmate within the brig in this supposed mutant safe haven. Well, if it's a mutant safe haven, but they have a prison that has mutants in it, with this mutant's powers being deemed too unstable. None other than Catherine Pryde, who supposedly returned from outside the mutants' encampment and is retrieved by Magneto and given back a helmet to block her powers and prevent her from turning intangible. Magneto says that this occurrence should be kept secret from the others, worried about morale. He also says he will ask Catherine why she was out there when she regains consciousness, with her having been knocked unconscious by the mutants that responded. As Magneto flies off to return Catherine to the brig and the AI mutant Danger, who runs the brig, Legacy retrieves a camera that she noticed Catherine had been holding before she was attacked, and it was knocked out of her hand, going unnoticed by the rest of the mutants. Legacy does not know why she wants to keep this discovery to herself and not share it with the others, but she ultimately chooses to explore this solo, and finds all the pictures on the camera are, mysteriously, blank. She decides to take the camera to this universe's version of Madison Jeffries, a technopath. Madison agrees to help his friend Legacy, interviewing the camera about the photos that it contains, and later allowing Legacy to kiss him so that she can borrow some of his powers. Legacy then infiltrates the brig after attempting to convince Magneto to just let her interrogate Catherine herself, to no avail. While Catherine doesn't have much to say about her adventure outside of the boundaries of the fortress, Legacy, after being caught by Danger, ends up running into another, even more mysterious prison in the brig, the Professor. As he is seemingly comatose, Legacy uses her powers to look into the mind of the Professor, and also ends up tapping into his power as well, tapping into the minds of basically every other mutant nearby and accidentally causing some, like Magneto, to even suffer seizures. Who is this Professor, and what really caused the existence of this alternate reality known as Age of X? Legacy seeks answers after being forced to go on the run, but will she get them?
First appearing in Edge of Spider-Geddon #4 from September of 2018, following along with the first 3 issues, which all introduce us access to a single alternate Spider-Man each, this story picks up reciting a letter written by none other than Peter Parker to his best friend, Harry Osborn. In this letter, read out over the course of the issue, Peter basically explains how if this letter is being read, then it means he has bit the dust and that Norman, Harry's father, is responsible. Pete also reveals that both Harry and himself have been working against Norman from inside of Oscorp, Peter on the science side and Harry on the corporate side of things. As Pete is telling Harry that Norman is probably onto him and that if Harry goes after him he should sneak in, Harry is decidedly not sneaking into Oscorp. He's walking right in the front door and going up the elevator, taking out several guards in the process, all while being watched by his 6-armed, sinister spider father on security cameras. We are actually given no information about how Norman gained these powers, assuming it was a spider, but he has them, and his costume is actually really cool, with a helmet instead of a mask that looks kind of like a big bicycle helmet. I know that doesn't sound cool, but I like this look. I kind of want to know what you guys think, so let me know down below. Anyways, according to Peter, Norman has been pouring an enormous amount of resources into a super secret project. He has put his science team, which included Peter, on the task of refining Peter's old web fluid project, making the web super strong, but also with a degree of plasticity. Norman also had others running tests about the breakdown of string theory in relation to, and I quote, timey-wimey alternate reality stuff. I don't know. While Peter theorizes this is for some kind of way to bungee jump through time and space, he's not really wrong. In reality, Spider-Norman has acquired a cosmic cube, but one that is warped and broken, giving him a window into multiple different realities. Now, realizing that Norman is putting all of this time and effort into this endeavor, Harry and Peter are essentially trying to weaken Oscorp. Harry infiltrates Oscorp and he manages to get his hands on this reality's version of the Kobold suit, aka the Green Goblin armor. Only here, it's silver and really cool. Now, with the suit, Harry makes his way to the Cosmic Cube. Harry and Spider-Norman face off, with Norman pretty readily besting his own son, but Harry still was able to fire off a laser while on the ropes that missed Norman, sure, but it hit the cube instead, destroying it. While this seems like a win, it actually gave Spider-Norman exactly what he wanted, and this opened up the web of life and destiny. But this is when, pretty much out of nowhere, Spider-Punk appears, taking Spider-Norman with him. Now, Spider-Punk showed up to grab Norman in order to bring him into the Spider-Geddon event that follows the Spider-Verse event. The Inheritors managed to revive themselves using Superior Spider-Man's, aka Doc Ock's, cloning vats. The multiversal Spider-Men split up into 2 squads, one led by Superior Spider-Man, who are all very much okay with taking the lives of the Inheritors. The multiversal Spider-Men split up into 2 squads, one led by Superior Spider-Man, who are all very much okay with taking the lives of the Inheritors to win the conflict, and the other squad being led by Miles Morales, and who are a little bit more morally positive. Now, as you can imagine, Spider-Norman is very much on the side of Superior Spider-Man here. Although, Spider-Norman, being Norman Osborn, isn't really down with taking orders, and so he and Otto are constantly fighting each other for the right to lead. Norman and Spiders-Man, the Spider-Man made up of thousands of little tiny spiders, on the other hand, are getting along swimmingly, and they actually splinter off from Otto's group, planning to trap the Inheritors on Earth 616, sacrificing the main Marvel Universe in order to beat the enemy. Following that plan, Norman and Spiders-Man head to Loom World and destroy it completely, with Spiders-Man sending one of his spiders to a ton of alternate realities, and Norman cutting off a piece of the web of life and destiny, giving him the ability to travel to any alternate Earth that he wants to. Now, for the rest of the Spider-Geddon event, both Norman and Spiders-Man basically just disappear. The next time we see the Sinister Duo is in Superior Spider-Man Volume 2, and all the way in issue number 9, where we learn that they have been secretly spying on Otto Octavius as he is living his Superior Spider-Man life in San Francisco. This pair secretly leaked the fact that the San Francisco Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius to the public, trying to ruin his reputation and get their revenge. Or it's more like Norman is trying to get his revenge and just using Spider-Man to do so, which was a mistake. Superior Spider-Man figures out that Spider-Man is involved and he captures one of his spiders in a wave disruption field, which basically means Spider-Man's consciousness is trapped in the one single little spider. This is when Otto forces the truth of who is behind this all out of the tiny little spider, and Norman, on the other hand, was hiding out in a completely different world. So, in order to go defeat him, Otto at Horizon University is attempting to use a dimensional viewer when Norman, who had actually traveled to Earth 616, turns it on, turns this all on its head, blowing up the machine and taking down a large part of the building as well, with Otto's friends and even his love interest inside. He then vows to destroy everything Otto has ever built, simply for insulting him, which is a very Norman Osborn thing to do. So now it's Norman Osborn Spider-Man versus Otto Octavius Spider-Man, and it's something I actually didn't know would be so awesome. It's cool. Norman ended up capturing a boy by the name of James, who Superior Spider-Man had saved and grown close to. With Otto begging Norman to spare the boy, Spider-Norman does a very Norman Osborn thing and offers an ultimatum. He gives Otto the choice of either taking the lives of 3 innocent, healthy civilians, or he will end James forever. This leads Otto to actually summon the demon Mephisto and make a deal with him. For Otto to revert himself back to the villain he used to be in order to have the ruthless will he needs to actually defeat Norman properly. When these two encounter each other, Otto has infiltrated Norman's place, sicked his Octobots on Spider-Man, and used a clone of his spider self to trick Norman into a false sense of security. I hope that makes sense. As Norman throws James out of a window, Otto reveals that he summoned a bunch of his old octopus harnesses, and while one of them saved James, 4 others and Otto himself beat the heckin' tar out of Norman Osborn, systematically breaking his bones with the arms in such a way that they will never heal back normally, trapping Norman in a broken body. Otto steals the piece of Web of Life and Destiny that Norman was using, and he tosses Spider-Norman back to his native Earth, Earth 44145. Now, the next time we see Norman is in Spider-Man Volume 4, Issue number 4 from this year, 2023. For a little bit of an explanation, in this story, Peter Parker and his allies, which weirdly enough includes Morlun for some reason, are fighting against the Wasp totem known as Shathra, who is trying to dominate the Web of Life and Destiny, or basically just the multiverse. Using her sting, she's able to convert people into a part of her hive, and she's doing that to a whole bunch of different Spider-Men across the multiverse. As a little fun fact, her forces also possess the Dagger Totem, which can completely erase someone from existence, which is what happened to 616 Spider-Man. Now, opening the story on Spider-Norman's Earth 44145, he and Spider-Man are attacked by Spider Biodroid of Earth 9221 and the Spider Rex, yes, a Spider T-Rex of Earth 66, both of whom had been forced into Shathra's hive. Norman and Spider-Man are hiding away in Norman's lab. As Norman tries to use the only piece of the web he has left to escape, he orders Spider-Man to try and attack the alternate spiders. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Spider-Man goes down like a chump, getting completely set ablaze by Spider Biodroid. The pair bust into the lab to find Norman, who didn't actually escape. Instead, Norman sent his part of the web, which is what Shathra was after, away to Earth 616, and then, refusing to become a part of the hive and wanting to win on his terms, Norman blows up the building with himself inside. On the alternate world of Earth 71928, when Peter Parker was bit by the radioactive spider, his motif was a little bit different. The spider that bit Peter here just so happened to be a Steatodia nobilis, also known as the Noble False Widow. This spider just so happens to have a very distinctive pattern on its rear end that is often mistaken or likened to the shape of a skull. So, of course, when Peter creates his Spider-Man suit, he uses a large skull logo alongside his spider logo. And it just so happens to be exactly like that of the Punisher. Other than that small change to the costume, after Peter is bit, he goes about a very similar path as a 616 continuity self. He discovers his powers, joins up in some underground wrestling matches, creates his own web shooters, and loves his aunt and uncle. He even still lets the robber that takes the life of Uncle Ben get away when they first encounter each other. The big difference to this tale betrayal comes when Peter confronts the thief in the warehouse like he does in the main continuity. Now, using the same iron that took Ben's life, Peter causes the passing of the burglar and was simultaneously captured on camera red-handed. While J. Jonah Jameson and the papers painted him as a criminal, Peter continued to try to capture or knock out criminals instead of resorting to loss of life. He captured pictures of himself fighting crime just like he does normally, and he made a living doing so. The problem for this Peter was that no matter what he did, superpowered villains would always come back for revenge, having learned and adapted each time they did so. The worst of these was naturally the Green Goblin. After many times observing the Goblin at work, Peter discovered that the Goblin armor was reactive when hit with the penetrative force of a bullet. When one hit the armor, it would cause an outward micro-explosion that negated the force impacting it, while being backed by ballistic fibers that also helped him out. While this did save the Goblin temporarily, the suit would need to be repaired before he could take the hit again. Now, I did say that Peter tried to knock out or capture his foes, but this Peter had a much colder personality, and he only tried that approach to crime fighting. After observing the Goblin, Peter upgraded his web shooters with several different types of ammunition, from high explosive and armor piercing to incendiary and EMP. He was much more okay with letting criminals end each other's lives, but then it was his turn. The first time he tested out these new additions to his arsenal was against the Sinister Six, who made a big mistake when they threatened Peter's loved ones. Peter's EMP rounds did wonders against Electro. He let his explosive rounds take down Kraven the Hunter. He pulled no punches when facing Mysterio, like at all. He turned Sandman into shattered glass with his incendiary rounds, ripped off the power source for Vulture's wings and just let him fall, and armor-piercing rounds did wonders against Dr. Octopus's arms. He put the entire Sinister Six 6 feet under. The fear in the eyes of Aunt May was all that he needed to know that he could never reveal who he was to anyone. The pictures Peter took of the altercation made it to the papers and caused an immediate nosedive in the rate of criminal activity because, let's be honest, a guy like Spider-Man running around completely ending the lives of criminals would be absolutely terrifying and very effective. Now, Peter carried on with his life. He started at Empire State University, met Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy, his first love interest. But as he transitioned from fighting crime as much to being a college student, his absence brought the rise of crime back again as criminals vied for control and authority on the streets of New York City. While innocents were sometimes caught in the crossfire, for the most part, criminals were taking each other out, except for the Kingpin, who Peter told us, quote, almost consolidated things, but Peter, quote, made sure that he now consolidates only in hell, which is a cold line from our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. The problem for Peter Parker really came with the Green Goblin, like I said before, who continued to be Peter's most vicious and persevering villain. Goblin learned how to nullify Peter's spider sense, which led to the villain being able to follow Peter and learn his identity. He managed to capture Peter, and he revealed himself as Norman Osborn as he challenged Peter to a fight, minus the spider's usual firepower. But Peter used the building around Norman as his firepower and brought him down, but importantly, not for good. While Norman was no longer an active threat and suffered from amnesia that kept Spider-Punisher's identity secret, Peter couldn't bring himself to end the guy's life. But it only took a short while for Norman's mental instability to rear its ugly head yet again, also restoring his memory and setting him on a path for revenge against Spider-Punisher and Peter Parker, who are one and the same person, as we know. This revenge came in the form of trying to end the life of Peter's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy. Now, Peter knew that unless the threat of the Goblin was ended there and then, none of his loved ones would ever be safe. So, one armor-piercing projectile followed by 2 Teflon-jacketed ones finally put a stopper to the issue of the Green Goblin. And unlike his 616 counterpart, Spider-Punisher was actually able to save the life of Gwen Stacy, reviving her after she had a pretty rough, web-softened impact on some scaffolding, instead of her getting the old snap courtesy of Peter's webs and physics. The passing of Norman Osborn set a reaction in Harry Osborn to seek revenge against the Punisher to, as he puts it, quote, punish the Punisher, but that didn't actually get followed up at all in the book. But Gwen and Peter were able to save their relationship and become a successful couple. But the fact that Peter almost ruined the relationship by keeping his Spider-Man life a secret from Gwen led him to give it up entirely. Peter ripped up his Spider-Punisher costume and left it in a garbage can down an alleyway. But just like before, Spider-Punisher's absence only brought a rise in crime once again. A conflict between various different mob families, including the Costa family, broke out. Now, a banker and money launderer for the Costa family named Forrest Hunt, who had been skimming profits off the top from the family, had been captured and held up in Central Park. At that same time, highly decorated Marine veteran Frank Castle and his family were flying kites in the park and just happened to stumble upon Forrest and the Costa family goons as they were showing Forrest the error of his ways. In an unfortunate turn of events, the Costa family turned their sights on Castle's family and wiped them out, leaving Frank battered and barely alive. As he fled the scene completely heartbroken and distraught, he stumbled into an alleyway and knocked over some garbage cans and laid on the ground as the Spider-Punisher's suit fell out and landed right on top of him, giving Castle the idea to become the new Punisher in this alternate world. Coming in at number 10 is the tale of Ice Giant Thor. A perfect what-if tale. It's almost surprising that it wasn't done before this point. In What If Thor in 2018, we get the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants instead of Loki being raised by Asgardians. Simple, but brilliant. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago. And just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here too, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adoptive brothers, Loki and Thor. Unfortunately though, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the frost giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki, his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of old Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer known as Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. Now we don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It ends on a rather sweet note, and I think that's lovely. Number 9, Fantastic Four as cosmonauts? Next, let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian. Well, for starters, their name is different. In fact, actually, they're pretty much all different. Now called the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudion Richards, the commie Reed Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming than having to stretch. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, is also on the team as Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin is also on the team, but he's still just Colossus and has all those powers except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, his sister, Ilyana Rasputina, is also on the team, who seems to have the powers of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool. After the demise of Stalin in this history, the team is put under the KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of the team, is not okay with it, especially after he accidentally ended the life of Giant Man while on a mission. Widowmaker makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero team goes on to fight for freedom and equality, which is not at all how I thought the story would go, but hey, it's good. Number 8, Jane Foster becomes Thor. Now, thankfully, Jane Foster as Thor has happened in the true 616 continuity, and it was really awesome. But here, it's a little different in this what if story. Number 10, actually. It is Jane Foster who first picks up the hammer Mjolnir, not Donald Blake. In this story, Jane accompanies Dr. Blake on his trip to Norway, and when he drops his cane into a ravine in the original, she instead goes down there to get it for him. Striking the stick on the ground, just like Donald Blake would have, she becomes Thordis. Yes, Thordis. Unlike the modern interpretation, a female wielding Mjolnir gets an entirely new name in this what if. Wielding the power of Thor, Thordis fights off the Saturn Rock people and then turns the cane that she seems to have just stolen from Donald Blake into a hairbrush to better fit in with her feminine alter ego, I guess, because men don't use hairbrushes. She has pretty much the same adventures as Thor, but crucially she is rejected by Odin for not being a man. Oh, and for some reason Sif gets with Donald Blake, which is kind of weird. This tracks all the way up until the events of Ragnarok, when Odin decides to give the hammer back to Donald Blake because he can't accept Jane as Thor. And then, as thanks, he turns Jane into a different god and then marries her. It's kind of gross, it's kind of really strange, it's kind of uncomfortable, but luckily it's only a story that comes from asking the question, what if?
Number 7. What if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? This one actually comes to us from a comic titled What If?, starring Daredevil, the man without fear. But the question posed in the intro is, what if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? Which is that's why I named the point that. It might not seem as dark as some other tales in the what if category, but the intro literally also poses the question in this issue. What if we shed a little light on the dark side of the Marvel Universe? And the story definitely delivers there, I would say. Here, Matt's dad takes the dive for his son and earns the money needed to send him to law school. Sounds pretty good. There, Matt meets Elektra. Also sounds pretty good. The two have a love affair that ends when her father is killed and they're both unable to save him together. Okay, it's starting to turn kinda dark. She leaves and Matt is then forced to deal with his own family tragedy as his father ends up in the hospital after a hit in a fight leaves him comatose. Okay, it's getting darker. Unable to afford the bills, he drops out of school and himself becomes a fighter, but when he is asked to take a dive for a paycheck, he refuses. As punishment, his father is killed, and Elektra returns to encourage Matt to seek retribution. This is where it gets pretty dark, I would say. Matt basically goes after Wilson Fisk with his intention to do it his own way. Now, he doesn't want to kill him, but he just wants to expose him for his illegal business dealings, which is a very Matt Murdock approach, I would say. In the end, though, Elektra kills Fisk for Matt basically during this confrontation, and Matt chooses to incriminate himself in the murder because he feels guilty about Kingpin's death. Yikes. Number 6. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by a radioactive spider? This what if comic, issue number 7 from the original series from the 70s, actually has 3 stories in it. In one of them, Flash Thompson tries on the role of superhero as he ends up becoming the one fatefully bitten by the radioactive spider that day in the science lab on the student field trip. And if you're wondering, well, Amanda, you know, Flash Thompson actually has been a hero. I know he's been a hero in the main continuity, but I mean, in this reality, he's trying on the superhero role of Spider-Man. He becomes Spider-Man and does his best to be a great hero, but actually dies during his attempt to be one. Sad. He fights the Vulture, and it's during a battle in the sky where the Vulture successfully manages to kick Flash off of him that Flash's Spider-Man falls to the ground. Unable to find much in the way of cushion or slowing his descent, the fall does him in, and Peter Parker finds Spider-Man in the alleyway, unmasking him to recognize the face of Flash Thompson, the ire of his high school experience. Now acknowledging the fact that Flash was Spider-Man though, Peter seems to forget all about this as he actually mourns the loss of Thompson, which makes it even more sad. Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? One of my personal favorites and definitely a dark story. This one involves Spider-Man being fully overtaken by his black suit after Reed attempts to remove it. In the end, Peter is drained of his life energy by the suit, which does inevitably leave him. Prematurely aged by this process, he ends up dying of old age, with Black Cat being the one to get revenge for Peter by killing the symbiote for good. It also features a very sad scene between May and old Peter, who poses as a colleague of Peter's from the Daily Bugle and basically comes to tell Aunt May before he dies how much Peter loved her. This sad and tragic what-if tale comes from issue number 4 of the 1989 comic series, if you would like to revisit it, as I have. Number 4. What if the Hulk had killed Wolverine? This story comes to us from issue number 50 of the first volume of the Marvel What If series. Here, Wolverine and the Hulk fight, as, you know, is common, but this time, during their, what I believe is intended to be their first fight, Wolverine ends up dead. This is all because Hulk is being used as a pawn by Forge's powerful nemesis, the Adversary. Very creative name, the Adversary. I wonder what that guy's about. Is he an adversary? He certainly is. In the end, Hulk threatens the lives of pretty much all of the X-Men, but does not end up killing them all. Once the Adversary reveals himself, Hulk attacks him, weakening him briefly, just long enough for Forge and Storm to basically escape his clutches. They strike back against him, and with Forge managing to cast a spell to defeat the adversary and basically seals the adversary off in another realm, banishing him from their reality for good. Still, while there are survivors of this battle, when Hulk transforms back to Bruce Banner, Bruce is confronted with the fact that he has taken multiple lives during this rampage, and that pretty much breaks Bruce, so I would say this is pretty tragic. Number 3. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? This comic has maybe one of the darkest endings around. In it, Punisher is tricked into killing Spider-Man. He's promised basically funds to help him in his fight against crime and those who took his family from him, and Frank is also made to believe that Spider-Man himself is a criminal and is not actually a hero. However, after killing Spider-Man, Frank learns the truth. He manages to track down the man who misguided him, the Jackal, aka Professor Miles Warren. He figures out that the Jackal is Warren, and insists that they wait for the cops instead of just, blowing Warren away. However, when the cops do arrive, it's revealed what Frank's real plan is here, to basically kill the Jackal in front of the cops and in return be killed by the cops, believing he deserves himself to be punished for what he did to poor Spider-Man. This all goes down in What If, issue number 58 from the 1989 series. Does seem like a Frank solution to a problem where he blames himself or something. Number 2. What if Flash Thompson became Spider-Man? I was kind of thinking that maybe in this story, Flash, might get a break here. But even here, he has a pretty bleak tale attached to him in another alternate reality where he also becomes Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker. The story culminates in a heated moment where Peter discovers Flash's secret, that he's Spider-Man. Filled with rage, Flash doesn't listen to Peter's pleas for help and instead blames him for everything that has gone wrong in his life recently, shouting at Peter, "You ruined my life," before hitting him with a deadly punch that basically cost Peter his life. This story comes from the 2018 What If Spider-Man comic, and I would recommend checking this one out. It's wild. Number 1. What if Phoenix had not died? The title for this story makes it sound like it might even be a positive and happy story, but don't be misguided, it's not happy. Well, it starts off pretty optimistic with the Phoenix not dying but being redeemed and even helping to defeat Galactus. In the end, the Dark Phoenix power does consume Jean, causing her to turn on her teammates, so she becomes, dark again. She kills not just the X-Men, but the world in her rage and sorrow, with her anger and fire continuing to spread outward, engulfing the universe. So not only do her friends die, the X-Men obviously, the world, but the universe is also completely in danger. So yeah.
Number 10. Norman Osborn with the Infinity Gauntlet. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers after the Civil War event, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Now, using the gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his own tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible and aggressive father from the past to show him all the things that he has accomplished in a really sad attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never really had as a child and still doesn't even have it now. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little worse given the fact that it was kind of his father's fault that Norman even turned out this way. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, Norman finds out that the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out what happened, it's revealed that Thanos has shown up to collect the gauntlet in his awesome Thanos fashion. Unfortunately, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he warns Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who he will never get it from. His father. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by Norman and the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Osborn just kinda loses it, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space. Which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he, and this world that he created, fade into nothing. Number 9. All the power, no responsibility. In this What If number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life all the way back when he first encountered him and canonically did nothing. That simple change of the story robs Peter of the lesson of great power means great responsibility, and instead he turns to a life in the public eye. Now as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation at almost any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a tiny little bit. I mean, it's cool to me. I don't know. It's really not that cool. When J. Jonah Jameson exposes him to the public though, we see quite a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man. Spider-Man threatens him and even eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite Peter when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It's only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn the old power and responsibility thing. Number 8. What if Aunt May passed on instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great, because in this what if story we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly Uncle Ben shows up and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid. He goes to a juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Now, instead of going with him, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart, he fixes his life, he meets Mary Jane, he focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior, and that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently, and with Uncle Ben as like a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred. He goes on to become the hero that New York deserves. Nice.
At number 7, what if Spider-Man's Uncle Ben had lived? In this alternate Marvel universe, Uncle Ben stays alive because he's not bothered by nagging back pain. In a twist of fate, when the burglar breaks into the house, Aunt May investigates instead of Ben, and sadly she meets her end. This story takes a wild turn as Uncle Ben, feeling distance from Peter, discovers his nephew's secret identity as Spider-Man. Instead of scolding Peter, Ben encourages him to be the Spidey for the right reasons and not out of guilt, but to help others. Now things heat up when Ben confronts J. Jonah Jameson about his smear campaign against Spider-Man, and an intense standoff leads to a deal where Peter will tackle crimes for the Bugle. But soon all this blows up in everybody's faces, and that's when the Green Goblin goes berserk, kidnapping Jameson. Spider-Man swoops in, sorts things out, and even helps Jonah Jameson, who turned into a hulking beast. Eventually, secrets are spilled, forgiveness flows, and Norman Osborn's Green Goblin identity is exposed way earlier than usual. This is one of those handful of what-if stories that have an overall significantly better outcome than the mainstream canon for the hero and his supporting characters because, among other things, Betty Brant doesn't lose her brother, and the early and very public unmasking of the Green Goblin gets rid of a plethora of trauma in Spider-Man's life. At number 6, what if Wolverine had eliminated the Hulk? In this alternate Marvel universe, this reality diverged during the battle between Wolverine and the Hulk. In this reality, Wolverine disobeys his order to capture him and instead takes him out. But that move set off a chain reaction of chaos that would ultimately lead to Wolverine's own demise. See, after this, Wolverine, feeling like the big shot, ends up accidentally ending an innocent person in a bar brawl. Then when his boss, James Hudson, says he has to face his consequences, Wolverine bolts. Magneto and his gang, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, swoop in to scoop him up. Now eventually he flips sides and joins the X-Men to take down the Brotherhood, but in the showdown with Magneto, things turn tragic as Magneto tricks Wolverine using his metal powers to turn Wolverine's own claws against him. The result being that Wolverine meets his end by getting skewered with his own claws. At number 5, what if the Dazzler had become the Herald of Galactus? The Dazzler is a mutant with the power to turn sound into light, but what if she gained the power cosmic? In this what if tale, Galactus, the cosmic entity that devours planets, chooses Dazzler as his herald after banishing his previous one, Terrax. Initially unwilling, Dazzler agrees to spare Earth from Galactus' hunger. But then instead of leading Galactus to inhabited worlds, Dazzler guides him towards empty planets, hoping to save lives. Over time, she even manages to awaken some feelings in the usually stoic Galactus. However, things take a turn when aliens seeking revenge for their planets attack Dazzler using Terrax's axe. Galactus retaliates fiercely, which angers Dazzler. After recovering, she's disappointed by Galactus' ruthless response. Returning to Earth centuries later, she finds it destroyed. With no other choice, she returns to Galactus, realizing she has nowhere else to go after so long. At number 4, what if the Fantastic Four had not gained their powers? In this world, Reed Richards decides to play it safe during their space mission, deciding instead to wait and do the rocket launch by the books with proper shielding. The result being that the trip to space is a success, and the team becomes a big shot in the space industry instead of gaining cool abilities. But surprisingly, that doesn't stop them from taking the heroic path. When Mole Man's monsters strike, the military steps in, but our fearless foursome, Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben, aren't deterred. They explore a tunnel beneath their place, and surprise, surprise, even without any superpowers, they outsmart the Mole Man and his creepy creatures. After this, they become old school adventurers, exploring mysteries and going on wild pulp adventures adventures without superpowers. At number 3, what if the Beast had truly become a beast? In this alternate story, Hank's mutation formula made him more savage, turning him into a blue furry creature with a ferocious mind this time. Worried about their friend, Professor X sends Cyclops, Marvel Girl, and Angel to help, but when they find the Beast in Central Park, he attacks them, torn between his animal instincts and warning them away. Then when Professor X shows up, the Beast fights, but manages to hang on to his humanity long enough to surrender. The X-Men can't cure him, so they find him a new home in the Savage Land, where he can be free with Zakar and Zabu, unable to continue on with the X-Men due to his savage nature. At number 2, what if Galactus had turned the Silver Surfer back into Norrin Radd? So the Silver Surfer, aka Norrin Radd, was longing to return to his home planet Zen-La and reunite with his beloved Shalabal. But here's a twist: Galactus, instead of leaving Norrin stranded, turns Shalabal into his new herald called Starglow, erasing her memories of Norrin. While Norrin, aided by the Fantastic Four, seeks a way back home using the Watcher's technology, Galactus arrives at Zen-La to devour the planet, and Shalabal, now loyal to Galactus, offers herself willingly, hoping to see Nora again. When Norrin pleads for an alternative, Galactus grants him his powers back, but confines him to Zen-La as its protector. And coming in at number 1, what if Loki had found Thor's hammer first? In an alternate Marvel universe, Loki grabs hold of Thor's destiny by seizing the stick that transforms Blake into Thor, leading to a domino effect of calamities. By denying Blake access to his power, Loki triggers a series of events, from Thor's demise to Asgard teetering on the brink of destruction. As chaos unfolds, Baldur gets taken out, and Odin's quest to reclaim his son spirals into conflict. Meanwhile, Thor, guided by Baldur and Valhalla, returns to combat Hela's forces. Heimdall and the Warriors 3 hunt for Mjolnir, facing Loki and a dragon blocking their path. Now amidst Asgard's turmoil, Sif steps up, wielding Mjolnir to free Thor and aid in defeating the encroaching armies. Thor redeems himself, helping to fend off the attackers and saving Asgard. And in a moment of reflection, Odin sacrifices an eye to free Baldur, highlighting the cost of redemption and lessons learned.
Number 10. What if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? That's exactly what happened in issue number 2 of the 1989 series. Following the events of Born Again in this alternate reality, Matt Murdock loses his mind, driven insane as a result of being tormented by Wilson Fisk, which honestly makes sense to me. I know I would be driven insane if all of that stuff happened to me. This causes Matt to take the fight directly to Kingpin, who he simply takes out by shooting him. After this detail is exposed, everyone is basically on his trail, including Punisher and Spider-Man. When Matt goes to beg for Richard Fisk, Wilson's son's, forgiveness, even Hobgoblin gets involved in this fray. While Matt ultimately dies in the fight protecting Richard from Hobgoblin, Richard, in an unexpected twist, ends up carrying on the Daredevil legacy. Which I guess shouldn't be too unexpected if you know about, 2099, where it's kind of what happens in 2099. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why don't you show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? Now, you'd think this would actually be one of the happier what-if stories, considering when Spider-Man started out, this was actually like one of his dreams to join the FF team, but he was denied it. However, in this universe, they do decide to allow Spider-Man to join them, making his dreams come true, but it actually ends up worse than if they just refused him like they did in the main continuity. I also think that this first issue of What If is pretty important, as it really sets the tone for what these hypothetical comic stories could be, a look into a much darker reality where not everything goes according to plan. But we don't have to really deal with the consequences long term because, these stories are like windows into other more distant worlds, so they don't affect our main world. We can kind of just see like, I wonder what that world would be like. Terrible? Yep. In issue number 1 of the first volume of What If, Spider-Man ends up joining the Fantastic Four team, which I believe they renamed themselves to the Fantastic Five. Still has a pretty good ring to it, actually. When Susan Storm actually makes the suggestion that, maybe letting him join wouldn't be such a bad idea, so Sue is actually the one that kind of gets him on the team ultimately here. But in the end, this results in her feeling often left out, shunted from this team as a result of Spider-Man's impressive presence. He just completely outdoes Sue, so she feels pretty left out. This causes her in the end to choose to remain with Namor, ultimately leaving the Fantastic Five team, something for which Spider-Man blames himself and which leaves a massive hole in the team and a massive hole in Reed's heart. Number 8. What if Spider-Man became a murderer? This is maybe the brightest of the darkest what if stories that I have on this list, but you know, it's still really dark, so hence why it's here, especially at the start here. In issue number 72 of the 1989 What If series, we answer the question, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Dun dun dun! With him confronting the burglar who killed his Uncle Ben and losing control of his emotions, killing said burglar in turn. This, however, eats Peter up inside, and it isn't until Dr. Curt Connors becomes the Lizard and decides to fess up to his own actions that Peter is actually inspired and is able to confess to the murder that he was responsible for and reveal that he is the one that's Spider-Man. He does some time, but thanks to him showing remorse, he only gets 5 years, and Aunt May is still waiting for him when he gets out with his costume. It's dark, but it's also kind of cute in the end, because I think one of his biggest concerns was that Aunt May would like never love him again, and she is upset, but she eventually gets over it, and she's like, well, you know, this is still my nephew, so kinda nice. Still terrible, but kinda nice.
Number 7, Iron Man the Traitor. In one of the first ever what ifs, when Iron Man is famously captured and forced to create weapons, he still creates the Iron Man armor, but the change comes when instead of booting up and busting his way out of where he is being held captive, the boot up sequence takes just a bit too long, and Yinsen's sacrifice doesn't buy Tony enough time. Tony is found and restrained before he can do anything. Now that he has been found and this new weapon, the Iron Man armor, is discovered, the leader of the terror organization, Chen Lu, plants a device in the arc reactor that keeps Tony alive, but that allows him to shut it off remotely if Tony doesn't do what he says. And he implants a communication device in Tony's skull so that Chen Lu can spy on and control Tony. Then he lets him be discovered and sets him free. Now, thanks to the fact that he can now control Tony, he forces him to become a hero like he would have anyways, gain the trust of the superhero community, and then he learns secrets pertaining to S.H.I.E.L.D. But it's once Tony is ordered to dispatch Reed Richards and goes to complete the mission that it's revealed that Tony had been recording a tape by speaking incredibly slowly, and he sent that tape to Reed, who, when he played it at a faster speed because he's super smart, he learned of the situation that Iron Man was in. Once their fight began, Iron Man eventually got, quote, incapacitated by Reed, who actually helped him remove the device inside Tony's heart, giving Tony the chance to get his revenge. Now, for a short and somewhat silly what-if story, it's actually really good. Number 6, New Fantastic Four. What If This Was the Fantastic Four is a comic that was a tribute to illustrator Mike Wieringo, who unexpectedly passed away while working on this story. And even if that wasn't the case, it's still actually one of my favorite what ifs. The original Fantastic Four is brought to an end by the Skrull agent Delilah, and in their place, a team of 4 other heroes step up to the plate, if not with a bit of reluctance. Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Now, Ben Grimm was the only member of the original team who survived, and at their funeral, he gave this new team his blessing while he went off to raise Franklin Richards. This new team came under attack from cosmic beings who seemed to sense that the Earth lost one of its major teams, but this was all orchestrated by Dr. Doom, as I'm sure no one is too surprised by. Thanks to Ghost Rider's inclusion on this team, Mephisto uses Doom and possesses him, and creates a team of the hero's villains who are power boosted with infernal magic. It's Venom, Abomination, Sabretooth, and Sandman. This fearsome four, as they call themselves, do battle with the new team of Fantastic Four members, eventually being defeated, revealing the Mephisto-possessed Doom, who almost destroys the team until he's stopped by a combined effort of the citizens of New York, and Spider-Man, utilizing the disruptor that finished off the Fantastic Four in the first place, saves the people of New York, saves Dr. Doom, and he saves the day, because it's Spider-Man. Number 5, Man-Spider. Okay, so in this story, everything that happens to Spider-Man is exactly the same. Oh, except I left out the extremely important detail that in What If number 8 in 1978, this isn't Peter Parker, it's actually Webster Weaver, an anthropomorphized spider in a world of other animal people. Oh, yes, and he gets bit by a radioactive human, giving this spider the proportional powers of a human. Apart from that, and the villains being hilarious alternate versions like Marvin the Hunter, Culture Vulture, Rude Rhino, the Green Gobbler, King Pig, Octodoctopus, and Leaping Lizard, everything is just the same as it always is, until one day Reyes, the bug spray baron, threatened to destroy the ozone layer unless he was given $1 trillion. It turns out that Reyes is actually the guy who defeated Webster's Uncle Ben, or Uncle Bug as he's called in this comic. Man-Spider saves the day, Reyes is destroyed, and he swings back home to Aunt Mayfly. It's lovely. Number 4, the Fantastic Four with different powers. The Fantastic Four are known as the first family of Marvel Comics. Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm combine great intelligence, sterling courage, and a staggering array of powers, making them one of the most powerful superhero teams in comics, and also one of the best families around. 1977's What If, number 6, shakes things up by reimagining a world where the Four acquire different sets of powers. This sets them on a dramatically divergent path. The story sees Reed, Susan, Johnny, and Ben subjected to the cosmic radiation that fans know gives them their powers, but this time around, Johnny becomes a living robot, Ben sprouts giant dragon wings, and Susan gains the ability to stretch her body to great lengths like Reed could. Reed, well, he kinda draws the short straw. He's transformed into a bodiless brain. The explorers band together as the Fantastic Four, but Reed's nature as a disembodied organ kinda leads to some problems, as you might suspect. Susan grows closer to Ben instead of Reed, and Reed despairs of ever getting her to love him again. Dr. Doom soon takes advantage of Reed's state by stealing him away for his own ends. Now, after a thrilling battle, Reed and the others manage to overcome Doom. Reed also manages to transfer his mind into Doom's body somehow. This means this new Fantastic Four consists of a winged Ben Grimm, stretchable Susan Storm, metallic Johnny, and Reed alive in the body of Dr. Doom. Kinda crazy. Number 3, Wolverine Punisher. What about the What If where Wolverine became a kind of Punisher? In this story, we're in 1920s Canada following a Wolverine who doesn't seem to actually have claws, or if he does, he barely uses them. He does seem to have his healing factor and senses though. Whatever his powers are, we find out he has a son with a lady who, works at a bar. He is forced to take responsibility for both of them and makes friends with the barkeep. But that all comes to an end when they are all brought to an end thanks to a fire caused by a man named Scarface who fled to Chicago. Now obviously Logan isn't going to just let that go. He tracks down the villain, and with the help of his friend, and all while wearing a skull and crossbone flags on his chest, he wields big bang booms and never pops his claws if he actually has any, but he looks totally amazing as he takes that guy out. It's also an incredibly weird twist on a version of Punisher, but admittedly a little more disappointing than I might have expected it to be, and I'm sorry if you get disappointed by it. Number 2, Hassenwald. Honestly, I'm not even sure how this makes sense, but in this What If comic, Marvel exists as a comic book company that writes all the same comics it normally would, including comic books about Ghost Rider Robbie Reyes, and that's important because he also happens to be an intern at Marvel, but is also still Ghost Rider. I don't know how it works. I never said these things need to make sense. What is honestly even weirder than that though is that the studios of Marvel are being visited by this Nordic death metal band called Hassenwald from Latveria, who have fun clubs all over the world, including in Wakanda. Oh, and they also have been accused of witchcraft, church burning, and eating people, which turns out to be true, as while they are visiting Marvel, they take out the donkey that runs the printing press and use it to create a possessed Ghost Rider comic that turns the world into a hellscape, making them the ultimate rulers of it, using the power of the old gods to do so. I don't know. Now, Robbie Reyes is trapped in this world where Hassenwald has dispatched the Marvel Universe and he needs to save it, I think? I don't know. After reading it though, I needed to sit down, so. And finally, in at number 1, Thanos joins the Avengers. In 2015's What If Infinity Thanos number 1, we meet a version of the Mad Titan who willingly teams up with the Avengers to take down the Builders, a race of super beings from another reality who wish to end the universe. Of course, Thanos' desire to become one of the Avengers ultimately turns out to be self-serving, but Captain America realizes this too late and he falls in battle to the Purple Menace. Thanos tells the other Avengers that Cap passed at the hands of the enemy, which the other Avengers accepted. He becomes a solid part of the team, albeit one kept hidden from the rest of humanity. Now, Thanos' mere presence appears to infect the other heroes with this kind of evil persona. In the story's epilogue, we see Tony Stark, Reed Richards, and Doctor Strange mulling over the possibility of beings like the Builders attacking them again. Now, this is when Thanos makes his presence known once more. He offers to help Earth's heroes destroy other worlds in the name of defending their own, kind of like in the Incursions. Kind of a downer. Number 10, the Fantastic Four as cosmonauts. Let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian? Well, for starters, their names are different. In fact, they're pretty much all different. Now the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudion Richards, the commie Reed Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, who is now Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin, who is still just Colossus and has all those powers except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, Pyotr's sister, Ilyana Rasputina, who seems to have the power of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool than the 616 continuity. After the demise of Stalin, the team is put under KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of this team, is not having it, especially after he accidentally ends the life of Giant Man while on a mission for them. Widowmaker then makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero team goes on to fight for freedom and equality. I didn't think that's how it would go, but here we are. Number 9, World War II Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it's instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discovered interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II that we fight is more like space sector war between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. And don't ask me to define where those areas are because I can't. It doesn't even tell us. As this is still all set at the same general time as the regular World War II, some of the same characters are gonna be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. This story has new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens. It's a good bit of fun. Now, we learn in the story that Admiral von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a quote master race. So it seems in this alternate world we can master interstellar travel, but we still can't just accept each other's differences. Number 8, Miles Morales becomes Wolverine? In this What If, we don't really get an explanation as to why, but instead of being his normal self, Miles Morales in this world is instead a mutant with the same abilities as Wolverine. And when he is younger, he is abducted alongside other children by Weapon X, who turn him into the adamantium skeleton super weapon, just like the original Wolverine, because of course that's what happens. Now fast forward a few years though, now in this world, Sentinels are being used to hunt down mutants by S.H.I.E.L.D. And after Miles takes out 3 of them, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends in this super cool looking warrior wielding an adamantium katana to take him out. This awesome S.H.I.E.L.D. warrior turns out to be Miles' father, and once he discovers this Wolverine mutant is his son, he turns on S.H.I.E.L.D. So obviously they send another assassin, Miles' uncle Aaron, the original bad guy, who seems to be doomed to be bad no matter what because he is this world's version of Sabretooth. Miles' father defends his son to his dying breath until Miles jumps in to beat Sabretooth to a pulp and almost ends him before his father convinces him not to and to instead be a hero. And then the X-Men show up to recruit Miles, led by a Professor X who is actually Genki Lee, the original Miles' best friend for some reason. It's weird, but it's cool. Number 7, Intelligent Design God Hulk. Most comic book readers, and especially fans of Marvel and the Hulk, know of the storyline where the Illuminati banished the Hulk from Earth to send him to another planet. Now he ended up crash landing on Sakaar and became a gladiator, turned liberator, turned ruler of the planet until his ship self-destructed, wiping out his family and bringing him back to Earth as one of the most powerful and angry versions of the Hulk ever. Well, in What If Planet Hulk, it ends up asking the question, what if the Illuminati's banishment had hit its original target? Because of an unforeseen anomaly and Bruce kind of losing his mind, in the main Marvel universe, Hulk was thrown off of his original course, which is what got him wound up on Sakaar in the first place. In this story, Hulk lands on the incredibly peaceful and serene planet that he was intended to, and sure, he goes a bit ragey at first, but he eventually realizes the planet is inhabited by a race of peaceful tiny little creatures, and they're super cute. Over long periods of time, the Hulk helps this race to evolve and survive against the threats of this planet, and even become a thriving civilization kinda similar to humans. They end up viewing the Hulk as their god, and he basically acts as one, leading them to wealth and prosperity and keeping them safe. Number 6, the world knew Daredevil was blind. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. Now this event kinda clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is kinda blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it kinda seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sort of makes fun of Daredevil, which is mean, saying it makes sense why he chose the yellow costume because he obviously couldn't see how bad it was. Damn, Spider-Man. The villains then begin to take advantage of this massive secret weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now, powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. So it did actually turn out pretty good in the end. Number 5. Dazzler, the Herald of Galactus. Dazzler in Marvel Comics is a super underrated mutant and mega pop star with the power to convert sound into light, which is pretty good for a musician, and especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts, as well as fight bad guys with a surprising level of power and efficiency. Well, in What If number 33, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being apparently the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who had hidden himself in a black hole. Now, Dazzler does this by using her light-based powers, and then Galactus just sends him back into the black hole as like a punishment, I think? It's kind of weird, but this is a What If comic, so just go with it. Dazzler was then given a huge boost with the power Cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. I don't know. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she does vow to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges this time because it seems like he's kind of got the hots for Dazzler. I'm not joking, that's actually kind of the reason. There's a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence, and then she decides to go back to join him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted love story. It's really strange. Number 4. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb all the way back when, and became irradiated and became the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long, like at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turned into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to speak or handle the situations he was now in properly. Like the intelligence was all internal.
Number 10. Dr. Murrow. The interesting thing too about Dr. Murrow is that some spelling for this character is like Dr. Morrow, but if you actually look at the comic itself, it's Murrow with a U, so I believe it's Murrow with a U, but if you say Morrow and I say Murrow, that's also fine. I'm not gonna come for you. Dr. Murrow appears in the What If issue number 11 from the 1997 series. Here we answer the question, what if the Marvel bullpen had been transformed into the Fantastic Four? Being from a different time period, there are definitely some extremely sexist tones in this issue. A lot of it aimed sadly at Fabulous Flo Steinberg, who stands in for Invisible Woman. But another ridiculous aspect of this issue, aside from that more serious one, are some of the villains that we see the bullpen version of the FF face off against. Like their first villain, Dr. Murrow. Dr. Murrow's island was the one that they planned on visiting before they were delivered some fan mail. Upon opening it up, they found a mysterious radio-like device which transformed them into the Fantastic Four, granting them powers after they were exposed to cosmic rays that the device emitted. Turns out that this was all part of a Skrull plot, which we find out later in the issue, and that Dr. Murrow was also a victim of a similar device. Oh no! But even with that, why did he attack them when they got to his island? Why is he a villain in all this? Why is he one of the first villains we run into? Did the transformation like make him, I don't know, just really mad or something? Or violent? The reality is they probably just wanted to start the issue off with a good fight and a bit of mystery, but still Murrow ends up being a pretty bizarre villain because of this. Because there's things that just aren't explained here. Oh well, I'm willing to come along for this strange ride in any What If. Number 9. Disappointed Loki. In the What If story, What If the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner, we get to see what would happen if the Hulk had kept Banner's wits and then ran into Loki's illusion, you know, with the train tracks and such. Turns out this version of the Hulk was too smart to fall for Loki's trap. Seeing the TNT on the train tracks, but believing it to be an illusion, meant that he would never be put onto a collision course with the Avengers, and therefore would never join that team. Instead, Loki ends up disappointed, and Banner goes on to fight against Galactus Galactus, joining with Professor X and Reed Richards to create the new and extremely powerful uni-being of X-Man. Poor Loki though, he's like, but I set this trap in. Alright. I guess not all traps are winners. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show some support for us on other platforms, head on over to Facebook, give us a like, give us a follow, it does help us out, and we're gonna have lots of exciting new content coming for you over there. Exciting. Number 8. Fake Captain America. Both weird and great in a lot of ways. Fake Captain America was William Burnside. Now, while William Burnside does exist in the 616 universe, where he was a well-meaning Captain America imposter driven mad by improper use of the super soldier serum, in the what-if reality of Earth 84444, he ended up becoming obsessed with communists, paranoid that they could be lurking around every corner, which is kind of what happened in the main continuity, but in this one, he's less like, oh no, it's just the super soldier serum, and more like he made some conscious choices here. Modeling America into less of a democracy under the name of Captain America, Burnside would be beaten back by the real Captain America, who in this story doesn't resurface until 1984, which means that Burnside has a lot of time to basically do harm to the American image and the influence of the nation's people. This warning story and the speech the real Cap gives at the end are both still pretty relevant today, which is why this is like a great issue, but also why it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how there's a lot of stuff in this that I feel like is still relevant, even though it's from 1984. Do we ever do new things, or does history just cycle in like some vicious loop? Probably that. Number 7. Maggie Nito. Maggie Nito appears in a humor issue of What If. She's the one who terrorizes poor old styrofoam skeleton Wolverine. She's technically supposed to be the female child version of Magneto, who is known in the comics for ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine over the course of a few horrifying panels of comics. Maggie Nito, on the other hand, doesn't need any powers to hurt her version of Wolverine, who is much more cowardly in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. Which, I mean, makes sense, considering he literally has a styrofoam skeleton. I mean, I would be afraid of Maggie Nito too, if I had a styrofoam skeleton. Also, just in general, she seems like a mean little girl.
Danger. This villain is definitely a weird one. It's basically just the humanoid form of the Danger Room, a highly sophisticated computer interface that the X-Men used to train. But in 2009's Astonishing X-Men number 9, the Danger Room comes to life and takes on a humanoid form that calls itself Danger. Although I know this isn't a What If issue, in 2010's What If Astonishing X-Men number 1, Danger gets a more focused storyline, and it's even weirder than you might expect. Basically, Ultron somehow catches wind that Danger has come to life and falls in love with her. They become a couple and go on a murder spree, killing all the X-Men and then eventually Professor X himself. Then they take to the cosmos and continue to kill all the organic life forms in their path, until they finally establish their own intergalactic empire. It's later pondered by the Watcher that if Professor X had only listened to Danger when she declared that she had gained sentience, she wouldn't have been so inclined to take him down. It's sort of a cool message about the dangers of AI, but first and foremost, it's just a weird antagonist in this What If issue. The Danger Room gets married to Ultron. It doesn't get much weirder than that, I don't think.
Number 5. Thanos. Another one of my favorites has to come from the What If Disney Plus streaming show, where we actually got to see what Thanos would be like if he were on the side of good. So technically here, I guess he's a hero, but of course in the main continuity we know him better as a villain, both in the comics and the MCU, so yeah. Thanos ends up joining the Ravagers and becoming a close ally of Star-Lord in episode 2 of the show, where we get to explore what the world would be like if T'Challa, instead of Peter Quill, ended up as Star-Lord. And guess what? Turns out the world would potentially be a lot better for it, minus the imminent doom of the universe as a result of Ego's plot to kind of like take it over, but ignoring that. Other than that, it was doing pretty well for itself, I gotta say. Thanos didn't even snap half the universe out of existence in this reality, and all because T'Challa convinced him not to do so by simply talking him down. Man, where was Black Panther when that was happening before? Why didn't he just come in and be like, hey, look, Thanos, no. Maybe he's got to travel in space before he can have those conversational skills. Maybe that's why.
At number 4 is Cable. So in this 2-part What If issue, Cable is the bad guy and he actually kills his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, as well as Professor X. Professor X seems to be getting a lot of heat on this list. And even though this is a what if and basically anything goes, it's just a really bizarre call to have part of the X-Men family travel through time to kill his parents and their noble mentor Charles Xavier. This naturally doesn't go unnoticed and actually starts an all-out war between the X-Men and the X-Force. And while these two groups are duking it out, Magneto takes the opportunity to take control of Washington, DC, which segues into that second part I mentioned, aptly named What If Magneto Took Over the USA. But regardless, this just made me feel weird to see a character we're used to seeing as a hero just take a sudden turn to evil, so much to the point where he kills his own flesh and blood in a brutal massacre. And why? Well, they have some differences in ideology, but why does that matter if they're in the past? Couldn't Cable have just stayed in his own time and believed in stuff over there? Although he's not really known to stay in his own time very often. It's just that he normally does it for good instead of doing it to start a massive war that ends in Sentinels dropping nukes on Washington and killing everyone. I don't know, was it worth it, Cable? Check out the issue and see if you think.
Number 3, Elektra. Elektra makes an appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34. This being a humor issue, we get to take a look at what might have happened had Elektra survived her run-in with Bullseye. Even though Elektra at this time was depicted as a villain, or, at least an extremely edgy anti-hero, it seems that this one-panel take on the character has her reconsider her life of crime as a result of her near-death experience. This is pretty weird, considering I'm pretty sure at this point Elektra would have had already a few near-death experiences in her line of work as an assassin. So, unless she knew she was going to die here and then that's not what happened, but I feel like for her this is just an average Tuesday. Elektra even goes so far as to consider settling down and getting married, and I quote, "or something." What is "or something"? Also, Elektra getting married just because she didn't die from Bullseye fighting her? Wow, that just seems a little unbelievable. Anything can happen in an alternate reality.
Number 2 is Dazzler. In What If number 33, the question is asked, what if Dazzler had become the Herald of Galactus? These days, Dazzler is known to be a relatively stagnant member of the X-Men and doesn't usually get a lot of mention in the mainstream. Sorry, Amanda. Amanda really likes Dazzler. However, in the 80s, it was a totally different story. Right before this issue of What If in 1981, Dazzler is taken on by Galactus as his herald, but only to complete a quick mission to retrieve his original herald. Then she goes back home. But fast forward 1 year later to 1982, and in this What If, the situation is revisited again, but in this case, she stays as his herald and actually becomes one of the most powerful villains in all the cosmos. The Herald of Galactus is an individual imbued with part of Galactus' power cosmic, and their job is to fly around the cosmos and look for planets for Galactus to consume. So it's a pretty big deal to be given the title of Herald, both for the one who's selected and for the people of the cosmos, because if you're doing your job right as a herald, you'd best believe you're ruining and ending the lives of countless others. So, for Dazzler, of all the heroes to be taken in by Galactus and given this responsibility, it just leaves me with a weird feeling in my gut. Like, why would a character that barely wants to be a hero and only really wants to sing, why would they take on the job of Herald of Galactus? The answer does lie in this issue, but it's still a bit confusing and maybe a bit out of character for Dazzler, which is why I put it at number 2.
Number 1, Susie Richards. In issue number 30 of the 1989 What If series, Susie, Reed and Sue's second child, becomes the villain. Susie is obviously meant to be a stand-in for Valeria Richards, who we have now, their daughter, who has a weird history where she was kind of both the oldest and then the youngest child of the fantastic duo. It's confusing, but don't worry about it. In this version of the story, she is most definitely just the younger, but despite being the younger sibling between her and Franklin, she still terrifies her brother, who in the main continuity was once known for insanely powerful reality warping abilities. Although I don't think he has those in this reality. But anyways, you know you're scary when you're scaring Franklin. Even a young Franklin. Susie is an evil little girl who it turns out was possessed by a hellspawn that came from the negative zone. In the end, Franklin is forced to fight and defeat her, but unfortunately all too late, as the rest of his family has already been killed by her. Even Dr. Doom doesn't stand a chance against the possessed Susie. Poor Franklin, he warned everyone, but they didn't listen.
Number 10, T'Challa Star-Lord. Have you ever seen the MCU's What If animated series? It is honestly really fun, and it has a great art style as well. But just like in the comics, it's the fun, possible scenarios of what if that are the star. One of the better, if not weirder, episodes revolves around a universe where instead of Peter Quill, it was Prince T'Challa of Wakanda who was abducted by the Ravagers all the way back in the day. T'Challa, as the new Star-Lord, convinced the Ravagers to become a Robin Hood-like group who steal from the rich and give to the less fortunate. Under his leadership, they became icons and they saved a lot of people, recruited and persuaded lots of heroes and villains to join the Ravagers, one of which even being Thanos. T'Challa heard of the orb on Morag, the one from the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy, and he goes to retrieve it, being stopped by Korath the Pursuer, just like Peter was. But unlike Peter though, Korath actually recognized T'Challa as Star-Lord and he joined up as well. He saved Peter Quill from Ego, saved Drax's family, got Nebula and Thanos to reconnect, and even stole a device from the Collector that could terraform ecosystems and save entire planets from starvation caused by overpopulation. That thing Thanos was trying to fix in the Avengers movies. He eventually joins the Guardians of the Multiverse to fight the insanely powered Ultron. It's pretty great. Number 9. Miles Morales becomes Wolverine. In this what if, we don't really get an explanation as to why, but instead of being his normal self, Miles Morales in this world is instead a mutant with the same abilities as Wolverine, and when he is younger he is abducted alongside other children by Weapon X who turn him into the adamantium skeleton super weapon just like the alternate Wolverine, because of course that's what happens. Fast forward a few years though. Now in this world, Sentinels are being used to hunt down mutants by S.H.I.E.L.D. And after Miles takes out like 3 of them, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends this super cool looking warrior wielding an adamantium katana to take him out. This awesome S.H.I.E.L.D. warrior turns out to be Miles' father, and once he discovers this Wolverine mutant is his son, he turns on S.H.I.E.L.D. So, obviously they send another assassin, Miles' uncle Aaron, who seems to be doomed to be bad no matter what because, you know, that's just how it goes. He is this world's version of Sabretooth. Miles' father defends his son to his dying breath until Miles jumps in to beat Sabretooth to a pulp and almost ends him too before his father convinces him to stop and to instead be a hero. And then the X-Men show up to recruit Miles, led by a professor who is Genki Lee, the original Miles' best friend for some reason. Yeah, I don't know, but this story is wild. You should check it out. Number 8. Wolverunisher. On the topic of Wolverine, what about the what if where Wolverine became a kind of Punisher? In this story, we were in 1920s Canada, following a Wolverine who doesn't seem to actually have claws, or if he does, he barely uses them. He does seem to have his healing factor and senses though. Whatever his powers are, he is still himself because we find out he has had a son with a lady who works at a bar. He is forced to take responsibility for them and makes friends with the barkeep, but that all comes to an end when they are all brought to an end thanks to a fire caused by a man named Scarface, who fled to Chicago. Obviously, Logan isn't going to let that go. He tracks down the villain and with the help of one Matteo Deprigia, and all while wearing a skull and crossbones flag on his chest and wielding firearms and basically never popping his claws, he actually takes his revenge on Scarface and it's great. I mean, he looks totally amazing in this story, but it's also an incredibly weird twist on a version of Punisher and a version of Wolverine. Also, it's a little more disappointing than I expected it to be.
Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like, months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages. Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story, we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The what if uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got his Spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee, as such, becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include when you could have picked, I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool.
At number 10, we have Benjamin Grimm with dragon wings. In What If number 6, the question is posed, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? And the answer is that things get very weird. Basically, instead of taking the form of the Thing, Benjamin Grimm's powers are reduced, or ameliorated, I guess, to basically just 2 giant dragon wings on his back. He decides that he wants to be known by citizens as Dragonfly, which just proves that as long as you've got powers, people are gonna celebrate you no matter what. Someone even feels his wing and says, "Hey, I'm touching his wing," and it's kinda cold, which is bizarre to me because it adds that little extra bit of detail that I don't think I needed while reading this one. The other heroes get their own makeovers as well, and I'm covering another one later on in this list, but just seeing a shirtless Ben Grimm flying around with purple scaly wings made me think, well, I just needed to put him on the list. At number 9, we have Medieval Iron Man. In this What If, the question is asked, what if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? So, Iron Man is basically the same as he's always been, except what I find super weird in this issue is that he so brutally outmatches everyone in the medieval era, but doesn't hold back at all. I mean, just on the cover, you see him blasting his futuristic energy blast into a crowd of helpless soldiers as they're screaming for their lives. I don't know what gets into Iron Man in this issue that makes him think that he's in any moral position to be dropping into the medieval times and dominating the combat game, but that's just how this one plays out, and honestly, it's great. It's a weird portrayal of Iron Man given the context of the story, but it's honestly a pretty cool what if that I recommend checking out. At number 8 is The Watcher as a stand-up comedian. I know he's not really a superhero, but I'd argue that he's more good than bad, and he's surely got powers, so he's on the list. In this one, The Watcher asks a bunch of different what if questions, one being, haven't you always wondered what would happen if The Watcher was a stand-up comedian? Not really, but okay, let's see what he's got. Basically, this issue delves into some pretty bizarre artwork and poses a bunch of different questions in a row. I suppose these are the comedic premises that the Watcher is throwing at us as a stand-up comedian. Such riveting humor as, what if the Hulk were yellow? And what if the Thing were blue? And who could forget, what if the Invisible Girl dyed her hair? Okay, that one's pretty funny. But this one just struck me as very bizarre. Although I think that was the goal of this issue and probably all of the what if issues, so mission accomplished, I guess.
Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series Volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, like I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, you know, a version of Spider-Man, what really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is... it's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other 2 stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the Underwater Kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess? Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? While all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen, this is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead, the ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a What If. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame, and I'm like, dang, why doesn't Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? I think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home, and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Man, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain, Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered, well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. The end. Number 1. What if Thanos had changed Galactus into a human being? I really love this What If story personally. It comes to us from, once again, one of the humor issues of What If, so you know it's gonna be a riot. In this story, Thanos turns Galactus into a human being in order to defeat him, and Galactus ends up on Earth with no memory of who he was or is. He does, however, happen to look a lot like Elvis Presley, and even sings and plays like him too. He meets a woman named Gertrude who introduces him to the works of Presley, and Galactus is basically convinced that he must indeed be like an amnesiac version of Elvis Presley, returned from the dead. He goes on to have a successful music career, and when his memories are later restored by Adam Warlock, who also offers to return his power to him, he actually decides instead to stay on Earth and live out his life here as Elvis with Gertrude and her son Toby. Which, I mean, fair enough. That sounds like a pretty good life.
Number 10. Johnny becomes a living robot. We have talked about 1977's What If number 6. It's the one where the Fantastic Four have different powers. You know, where Reed becomes a brain and Ben Grimm gains dragon wings. That one. Sue Storm gets the most boring power, just taking on Reed Richards' stretching ability, but Johnny got a power that doesn't really make sense to me. Growing extra limbs or losing your body, minus your brain, and being human rubber doesn't really make sense either, but how the cosmic rays converted Johnny into a mechanical living robot with metal parts that calls himself Mandroid, I'll never know. Johnny is now forever a living robot and can control other forms of technology. He's also eternally a metal version of himself, which is honestly pretty good for a guy who loves his looks, because they'll never change. He's still a hothead though, so there's that. Number 9. WW2 Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it is instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discover interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II we fight is more like Space Sector War, between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. Don't ask me to define where those sectors are, I cannot. As this is still set at the same general time as regular WW2, some of these same characters are going to be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens. It's a good bit of fun. We learn in the story that Admiral Von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a master race. So it seems we can master interstellar travel, but we still can't just accept each other's differences yet. Who put some reality in my comic book? Number 8. Thor, Herald of Galactus. Yes, the terrifying thought of someone as powerful as Thor becoming the Herald of Galactus is a strange thought, if only because it's so troubling. In this What If, Thor beats the ever-living heck out of the female Silver Surfer, who is the Herald of Galactus as he attacks Asgard, after she mortally wounds Sif. Seeing just how powerful Thor and his hammer are, Galactus stops the fight and offers Thor a place as his herald. Now, Thor initially says no, as we'd expect, and goes to keep fighting Galactus, but when the big purple dude points out that Asgard is in pretty bad shape, Thor takes one look, drops his hammer, and accepts. Just like that. Now, Thor makes a pretty awesome looking herald, even in the odd style of the comic, choosing the most fearsome and brutal worlds to feed to the World Eater, and sparing the weaker innocent worlds, again, as we'd expect. When Thor hears of Asgard being ruled over by Loki though, who de-lifed Odin and left Asgard in ruins, he takes some time from heralding to deal with his brother. Rediscovering his hammer and wielding it alongside the power cosmic, Thor becomes extremely powerful. Freeing his imprisoned friends and giving up Asgard for Galactus to feast upon, he destroys Loki and his frost giants and remains as the Herald of Galactus, saving innocent worlds from his destruction. Awesome.
At number 7, we have Maggie Nito. This is a very niche one, and I'll give you $1 if you can pause the video now and guess where this character makes her first and only appearance. Okay, Maggie Nito is a mean little girl with a Venom shirt, and she appears on a gag splash page in What If issue number 100. Called Wolverwimp. Wolverwimp was covered in the first part of this video on the channel. It's basically Wolverine with styrofoam bones. But on the cover right next to him, we're not quite sure who Maggie Nito is or what she symbolizes, but it's suggested that she may have some powers of her own, possibly similar to those of the popular anti-hero Magneto. Even though she's mean, it's arguable that she'd be considered a superhero if her story was given some more airtime. If she was meant to be the Magneto of this hypothetical storyline, we just hope she would take on the hero status that Magneto currently flaunts. I don't know. Comment below what you think Magneto's powers would be if she was given a proper issue. At number 6 is Rockstar Black Bolt. In this What If issue, a bunch of different questions are asked in the same comic, and each one gets a short exploration of what would happen. In the case of Black Bolt becoming a rock star, his voice would naturally dismantle the structure of the arena he was singing at, and probably beyond. Along with his band, the Inhumans, this image is just so weird to picture for some reason. Not the crumbling environment, but just the image of Black Bolt screaming his soul out into the microphone, singing none other than a Rolling Stones song. I suppose all these what ifs are gonna give us weird new perspectives of the characters we know doing things they don't normally do, but for some reason this one just gave me a weird vibe. Maybe it's that one panel where he's screaming into the mic with his tongue out. At number 5, we have Doctor Doom / The Thing. This one falls in the category of weird but also pretty badass, at least in how he looks. And maybe arguable on whether or not he's a hero in this case, because it is Doctor Doom that turns into the Thing, not the other way around. But let's just call this character a direct mix between the Thing and Doctor Doom for the purposes of this list, which would make him good enough. Basically, in this what if, Ben Grimm is turned into the Hulk, and Doctor Doom is instead the one who's turned into the Thing. There's a lot going on in this story, as you can imagine, but for a brief period we get to see the rocky figure of the Thing decked out in Doctor Doom's green hood. And when he inevitably faces off against the Ben Grimm Hulk, he does get taken down a notch after a rough defeat. But it was a pretty weird combo while it lasted. Cool, but weird. But also cool, but weird. Definitely weird. At number 4 is Storm Thor. This character comes to be in the what if that poses the question, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? And the answer is that Storm is somehow able to lift Mjolnir and become Thor. There have been other heroes before that have wielded Mjolnir, like Beta Ray Bill, Captain America, and even Superman. But in this case, Storm becomes the goddess of thunder. And it's just a weird image to see her in the cape and shoulder armor. But it gets even weirder when she's tasked with clashing against a version of Thor that was turned into a frog, or the other way around, I can't really remember. If you saw the first part of this video, I covered Frog Thor already, but I figured we needed to talk about Storm Thor as well. It's fair to say that this was a weird what if issue. It's made it into both parts of this list. At number 3, we have 1000 Hulks. This obviously isn't one individual weird hero, but an event that spawns 1000 of the same character and creates a very weird army of nameless versions of the Hulk. So, what if? What would happen? Well, if you couldn't already have guessed, the answer is insanity. Basically, the title is What If the Gamma Bomb Spawned 1000 Hulks? But it's not quite what actually takes place in the story. The story explores the tragic events of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs and theorizes if instead of decimating whole populations, they actually spawned 1000 Japanese Hulks. It's a weird theory to ponder. I feel like they could have kept it out of a tragic historical context and still gotten the point across, but nonetheless, 1000 Hulks is a very strange and fun what if. Spoiler, they take over America, which you could imagine is totally possible if there were 1000 Hulks, and I'm sure they could do it in like a day. There'd be zero stability when they finally got control. At number 2, we have Reed Richards as a bodiless brain. This character shows up in the what if that asks, what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? Yes, it's the same one that I covered earlier that had Ben Grimm sporting dragon wings. Only in Mr. Fantastic's case, he's reduced to a tiny little fleshy brain just laying on the ground. But he can talk and everything still, just telekinetically. He also seems to have mind control capabilities. What's hilarious about this version of Reed Richards is that he seems super optimistic about the whole thing. Like, he's completely vulnerable and helpless, but all in all, he's totally looking forward to life as a brain, or as Big Brain, which seems to be his new moniker. It's sort of obvious from the jump that his change into a brain is sort of a nod to Reed Richards' famed intellect as one of the greatest minds in the world. But I guess they wanted to see what he could accomplish with just the mind part and nothing else. Good thing he's got his Fantastic Four buddies to carry him around, because otherwise he'd still be sitting on that rock waiting for someone's mind to control. At number 1, we have Aunt May Spider-Woman. This one is self-explanatory really. The question is posed, what if Aunt May was the one bitten by the radioactive spider? It's at the end of issue number 23, volume 1. Check it out if you have time. Basically, she comes home and the spider's on the door frame. It bites her, and the next thing we know, Aunt May is crawling up the side of a building. Then she promptly sews her own costume together and starts fighting a frog-like villain with springs on his feet. What makes this character even goofier is that as all this is happening, she forgets that she'd been in the middle of baking bread and the dough has expanded beyond what was expected. Like way beyond. It pretty much fills her whole entire kitchen. She then takes the dough and uses it to her advantage as she summons it in battle to soften a big free fall, and then even turns it into a whip and hooks the frog dude's ankle. She literally uses the dough to like swing the frog guy into a tree and deliver the final blow. It's definitely one of the silliest moments in any Marvel comic book I've read thus far, and I'm just surprised it didn't make it into the part 1 of this video.
Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the Hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed of course to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which is kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question like if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality where instead of just one Hulk, or the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends.
Number 7. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. What if Volume 2, number 24 takes the story of Uncanny X-Men number 159, in which Dracula has drunk just just enough from Storm to gain control of her mind. But instead, in What If, he drinks enough to completely turn her into a member of the undead. As an evil, unstoppable vampire, Storm turns all the other X-Men into vampires as well. But thanks to Wolverine's healing factor and berserker powers, he is able to resist the complete mind control of Dracula and beheads the Vampire King. Now, after either turning or delifing almost all the other heroes and having the US turned into a quarantine zone, the only hero left to stop Wolverine, Vampire Lord, has found his perfect vessel after traveling the astral plane. Doctor Strange's spirit and Frank Castle, the Punisher, sort of merged together, and being the most accomplished vampire hunter, Frank dispatches quite a few vamps before Kitty Pryde attempts to split the two before being separated from her head. This, of all things, snaps Wolverine out of it, and he gets to the Darkhold and destroys himself and every single other vampire. Wow, what a roller coaster of emotion. Number 6. Fantastic Four as cosmonauts. Let's explore the what if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian? Well, for starters, their name is different. In fact, they're pretty much all different. Now, the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudian Richards, the commie Red Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, who is now Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin, who is still just Colossus and has all those powers except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, Piotr's sister Ilyana Rasputina, who seems to have the powers of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool than the 616 continuity. After the demise of Stalin, the team is put under KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of the team, is not having it, especially after he accidentally ends the life of Giant Man. Widowmaker makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero teams go on to fight for freedom and equality. But that isn't how you thought it would go. I didn't. Number 5. Daredevil is bullied and just gives up. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. This kind of clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is already blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sort of makes fun of him, saying it makes sense why he chose that yellow costume, because he couldn't see how bad it was, you know? Villains begin to take advantage of the massive weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. Wow, kind of a nice ending there. Number 4, Limo Man. In one of those many crazy panels in number 34 of What If, remember that one where the Watcher is a comedian? We get to see a single panel that asks the question, what if Tony Stark owned an auto company instead of a weapons company? Now, whoever was writing this panel was absolutely cooking with gas. They knew what was up. Basically, if that was the case, then the world would get to interact with Limo Man, a hero with a license plate, belt, tire pauldrons, with rear view mirror horns, headlights on his chest, and a sweet pair of rollerblades. He is honestly the least cool Transformer you have ever seen. He does look like he's made up of a luxury car though, so I guess that gives him some kind of arbitrary style points. Right? At least the robber he seems to be facing seems to be a little bit worried. Number 3, 6-armed Spider-Man. In the legit continuity, Spider-Man undergoes an experiment to try and get rid of his spider abilities. Instead, he gains 2 extra sets of arms. Great success! In the original universe, he uses a serum with the blood of the living vampire Morbius to revert back to his normal self. But in What If number 42, Morbius is eaten by sharks, because of course he is. And Spider-Man is doomed to retain his 8 limbs. Ultimately, this Spider-Man learns that maybe these limbs are not a curse. but actually give him a buff in his agility and attack power. He is even able to save Gwen Stacy from her demise. Looks like someone rolled a natural 20. He was so popular that he went on to actually go on to be included in a few multiversal Spider events. So honestly, a great, if not weird, version of Spider-Man. Number 2, Dazzler, Herald of Galactus. Dazzler is already weird without being in a What If story. She's a collab between Marvel and a record label. That's all I have to say. Okay, so Dazzler's power is that she can convert sound into light. Pretty good for a disco singer. And especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts. In What If number 33 though, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who hid in a black hole, which she does. And then, in the alternate timeline, Galactus sends him back into the black hole as a punishment? I don't know, okay? She was given a huge boost with the power cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she vows to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges because, well, it seems like he's got the hots for Dazzler, or whatever the world-eating equivalent of the hots is. There is a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence. And she goes back to him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted, intergalactic love story. I don't know, it's really strange. Number 1, Jane Foster becomes Thor. But Adam, this happens in the 616 continuity. Yes, but this one's a little bit different. In this What If story, number 10 actually, it is Jane Foster who first picks up the hammer Mjolnir, not Donald Blake. In this story, Jane accompanies Dr. Blake on his trip to Norway, and when he drops his cane into a ravine, she goes down there to get it for him instead. Striking the stick, she becomes Thordis. Yes, Thordis. Unlike the modern interpretation, a female wielding Mjolnir gets an entirely new name. Wielding the power of Thor, Thordis fights off the Saturn Rock people, and then turns the cane that she seems to have stolen from Donald Blake, leaving him helpless without a cane, into a hairbrush to better fit in with her feminine alter ego, because men don't use hairbrushes apparently. She has pretty much the same adventures as Thor. She's rejected by Odin, and Sif gets with Donald Blake, until the events of Ragnarok when Odin decides to give the hammer back to Blake because he can't accept Jane as Thor. And then, as thanks, he turns Jane into a different god and then marries her? Kinda gross, kinda really strange, kind of uncomfortable. Luckily, it's only a story that comes from the question, what if?
Leapfrog. This spring-loaded villain appears in the What If that has Aunt May gaining Spider-Man's powers instead of Peter Parker. And before you jump down my throat, Leapfrog does appear in other comics first, I know this, actually first showing up in Daredevil number 25, but this iteration of the character is clearly meant to be more slapstick and ridiculous than he normally is, which is saying a lot, considering this must be one of the silliest villains in Marvel. But case in point, his first appearance in this What If issue shows him crashing through a brick wall and just swearing at everybody, screaming expletives as he bounces past a group of civilians and a news reporter. He ends up in a battle with Aunt May's Spider-Woman and gets thwarted by nothing other than a stretchy mass of dough that Aunt May uses to lasso him into a tree. He's just clearly such a dumb villain and appears for what I could only imagine was comedic value to the already hysterical What If issue.
Number 9, Ghost Grandpa. While technically Ghost Riders are supposed to be heroes, this one doesn't seem to be too nice in terms of the brief glimpse that we see of him. And it's because of that I decided to include him as a kind of like a low-key villain. Ghost Grandpa makes his appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34, where we ask the question, what if Ghost Rider had possessed someone else? Instead of Johnny Blaze, of course. The answer allows us to take a look at a few different candidates, including Ghost Skater and Ghost Baby, but while both talk about punishing evildoers and getting vengeance, Ghost Grandpa only seems to be interested in getting revenge on his nurse for delaying his glass of warm milk.
Number 8 is Wolverine, Lord of Vampires. This villain is bizarre because it's the embodiment of a character we've all known forever, but who doesn't really exhibit any of his typical traits. In What If number 24, Wolverine takes on the Lord of Vampires, who tries to bite him to turn Wolverine into a vampire himself. And since Wolverine was too badass to simply be turned into a vampire, he decides it's only in his character to kill the guy. And he does, but what happens when you kill the Lord of Vampires is that you take on the title yourself. And this is when Wolverine starts to change into a very strange version of himself. Right away, Wolverine starts turning his former friends into vampires, with his demeanor totally shifting as he uses like mind control powers on them, which is just pretty strange on its own. Honestly, this is what it is. It's just weird seeing Wolverine without any level of humanity in him anymore. Something about this transformation doesn't seem right and gives me some very conflicting feelings towards the whole thing. Although I gotta say, he does turn out to be a pretty powerful Lord of Vampires. He even takes out Doctor Strange in a harrowing battle, which says a lot for Wolverine on its own. This suggests that his power level is pretty heavily increased after getting the title of Lord of Vampires. Doesn't change the pop collar and bat-eared hairdo though. This is a list about weird villains, not powerful ones. Although he might end up on both, he still ranks on this one for sure. I mean, just look at him.
Number 7. Civil War Captain America. Honestly, I'm kind of a fan of this What If story, but it does have some strange moments and twists on characters you might not expect. For example, the story starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of the regiment, and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass. Our Steve obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart that shines through as strong and good. After sustaining injuries from not following his commander's orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by a Private Wilson, taken in by the Shawnee at a young age. Sensing the goodness in his heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit on Mr. Rogers that makes you on the outside whatever you are on the inside. And this happens just as Barnes stumbles upon their location. The power of the ritual blasts Barnes away, and when we see his face, he has become the White Skull, which, I mean, you could just call him Skull, because skulls are white, you know, but whatever. And Steve has become a mystical super soldier, wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. He goes on to save presidents and leaves a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues all the way to the modern day. It's pretty sweet. Number 6. Spider-Man Punisher. On Earth 71928, or the What If Peter Parker Became the Punisher story, Peter's life remained pretty much the same as Earth 616 Peter. That is, until Uncle Ben's life was drawn to a close, and in response, Peter dispatched the robber who did the deed. In a very Punisher-like decision, Peter decided to deal with crime from this point on by any means necessary. Meaning, he started de-lifing criminals. Peter tried to avoid this at first, trying to go his normal route, but since criminals are criminals, and they always come back, and he knows how much easier of a solution it is to just take them out Punisher style, he went full force into that lifestyle. The easy solution, in my opinion, is not the heroic solution, but hey, that's how it goes. He carried the blam blam that took out Uncle Ben's life, as well as other weaponry and multiple different types of ammunition. His suit also took a skull logo instead of the traditional spider logo. Not because they want him to look like the Punisher, but due to the fact that the spider that gave him his powers was a noble false widow, which has a cephalothorax that looks like a skull. That's the reason. Not because the Punisher. Stop. Stop, he's not the Punisher, stop. Number 5. What if Ghost Rider was a baby? I know we keep pulling from this one, but that damn What If the Watcher was a stand-up comedian, What If comic, it's honestly the gift that just keeps on giving. There is a full page devoted to the question of what if the Ghost Rider had possessed someone else, someone other than Johnny Blaze. And of course, instead of finding some other able-bodied man or woman, a cigarette-smoking, leather vest-wearing Watcher shows us the spirit of vengeance inhabiting the body of an elderly woman in a wheelchair demanding warm milk, a rollerblade-wearing woman vowing to bring an end to disco, and an infant in a stroller. A big-headed goo-goo gaga who will hunt for vengeance after it finds someone to change its diaper. And just to make it 10 times better, this wee bab is wielding a cat, swinging around its head as it zooms around its Hellfire stroller. I can't make this up. I honestly can't. Number 4. Barbarian Hulk. Alright, this one requires a bit of unpacking. So, in issue 23 of What If, the Incredible Hulk has fallen in love with a woman named Jarella, a green-skinned queen from the subatomic world of Kai, who was brought back to our world when the Hulk was unshrunk. In regular continuity, she is laid to rest after sacrificing herself to save a boy from some rubble during a Hulk battle. But in this story, she lives, and the Hulk and Jarella are shrunk again so they can go and live happily ever after, on the subatomic level in the Kingdom of Kai. Now, Kai, for some reason, is very medieval / Roman / ancient in general, and Hulk, who now possesses his full intelligence, becomes king alongside Jarella. Soon, a dark plot by some dark gods and their dark minions rears its ugly head, and Hulk, alongside a group of other subatomic barbaric heroes, goes to thwart them, facing off against a second Savage Hulk that seems to have just been dispatched in like 2 comic panels. And that's where it ends. I'm assuming Hulk just stays subatomic and never returns to Earth, living as a microscopic barbarian for the rest of his life. Please check out this story. Number 3, Doom! Sorry. What would a good guy version of one of the strongest, most quotable, and most villainous villains in the pages of Marvel look like? Well, in issue 22 of What If, we get to see just that. When the Victor Von Doom of this universe discovers Reed Richards looking over his experiment notes, uninvited, he instead invites Reed to come help him out, which I think a true scientist would do. With Reed's help, he's able to contact his mother in the afterlife and learns of his royal blood. He trains in the advanced technology and mystical arts of an order of monks in Tibet and in the darkest places of sorcery, and is granted, instead of his classic armor, this really sweet golden armor evocative of knights. I think he looks pretty cool, but that's just me. He uses his knowledge to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto, and uses his technology and sorcery to free his kingdom from an oppressive ruler. And all goes really well, until Mephisto comes back demanding the soul of his lover Valeria in exchange for the freedom of his people. Then he battles Mephisto once every year to try and save his love. It was almost a happy ending. Number 2, Spider Actor. A second Spider-Man What If on this list? Oh my. In this What If number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life. That simple act robs Peter of the lesson of the responsibility of having great power, and instead, he turns to a life in the public eye. Now, as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation almost at any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a little bit. Well, it wasn't really that cool. When JJ exposes him to the public though, we see a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man, when he threatens him and eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite him when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It is only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn that old power and responsibility thing. But man, Peter's a bit of a snob this way, I don't like it. Number 1, Fantastic Four. In the very first What If comic, the question that is posed is pretty simple. What if, instead of rejecting Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four instead let Spider-Man join? Marvel's most popular family adopting Marvel's favorite hero? A match made in heaven. The Fantastic Five go on to fight crime and supervillains. That is, until the battle with Namor the Submariner. In this alternate reality, at the end of this battle, Sue Storm feels kind of cast to the wayside, with more focus being put upon Peter and the other members of the team, and she leaves with Namor and becomes his bride. It completely stops the marriage of Reed and Sue from ever happening, which is just a weird, unnatural world to see. We don't like it. But life goes on, and the new Fantastic Four featuring Spider-Man go on with their lives. Number 10. Ice Giant Thor. A perfect what if tale. It's almost surprising it wasn't done before this point. In What If Thor in 2018, we get the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago. And just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here too, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adoptive brothers. Unfortunately, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the frost giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki. his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons, and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison, and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge, until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father, while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer, Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. We don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It ends on a rather sweet note though. Number 9. Man-Spider. Okay, so in this story, everything that happens to Spider-Man is exactly the same. Oh, sorry, I left out the extremely important detail that in What If number 8 in 1978, this isn't Peter Parker, it's Webster Weaver, an anthropomorphized spider in a world of other animal people. Oh yes, and he gets bit by a radioactive human, giving this spider the proportional powers of a human. Apart from that, and the villains being hilarious alternate versions like Marvin the Hunter, Culture Vulture, Rude Rhino, the Green Gobbler, King Pig, Octodoctopus, and Leaping Lizard, everything is just the same as it always is. Until one day, Ray's the Bug Spray Baron threatened to destroy the ozone unless he was given $1 trillion. Turns out Ray's is the guy who defeated Webster's Uncle Ben. Uncle Bug. Man-Spider saves the day, Ray's is destroyed, and he swings back home to Aunt Mayfly. Okay, yes, it's totally different, but a lot of story beats are still the same, so there's that. Number 8. Mustang. What If 114 posed us the question, what if heroes didn't leave the battle world? The answer? They make babies! While there are a few super kids in this story, the one I found to be the strangest was Mustang. Mustang is Clint Barton Jr., and I bet you'll never guess who his father is. His mother, on the other hand, again, not surprising if you just look at him, is Jennifer Walters, the She-Hulk. So, with these two avenging parents, that leaves Mustang with a super strength that isn't quite on She-Hulk's level, and an affinity for using bows. I'm sorry, it's just an odd combo to me. He's a bit taller than almost everyone else too, which makes sense. So I'm guessing this gives him the ability to use bigger bows with much higher tensile strength? So he can shoot bigger arrows? He can fire them much faster? Look, I'm not saying these powers aren't helpful or cool. Super strength is a classic. They're just odd when they're put together. Also, why Mustang? Number 7. What if Aunt May died instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great. Because in this What If story, we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly, Uncle Ben shows up, and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid. He goes to juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Instead of going with him though, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart. He fixes his life. He meets Mary Jane. He focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior, and that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently. And with Uncle Ben as a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred, he goes on to become the hero New York deserves. Number 6. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb and become irradiated and become the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turns into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to properly speak or really handle the situations he was now in properly. For example, he accidentally completely squashed Rick Jones. He stopped Igor, the Russian spy who caused the Gamma explosion, but also caused untold damage in the process. And after fighting the military, it turns out he threw a tank that traveled all the way to the house of Betty Ross' daughter. The tank he threw crushed the house with Betty inside. He went to find her, as she would be the only one who's able to actually help him in this situation that he's in, and instead all he found was the result of what he had done, and a weeping Bruce Banner. Ross transforms back into his regular form, which allows Bruce to pull out a weapon and end the life of this now tormented Ross. I'm sorry, I know this didn't end on a particularly happy note. This is, I guess, the more depressing story than that Spider-Man one. Number 5. Ghost Rider. Honestly, not even sure how this makes sense, but in this What If comic, Marvel, the comic company, exists as a comic book company that writes all the same comics it normally would, including comic books about Ghost Rider Robbie Reyes, who also happens to be an intern at Marvel in this story, but is also still Ghost Rider. Look, I never said that these things had to make sense, okay? What is honestly even weirder is that the studios of Marvel are being visited by this Nordic death metal band called Hassenwald from Latveria, who have fun clubs all over the world, including in Wakanda. Oh, and they also have been accused of witchcraft, church burning, and eating people. It turns out to all be true, as while they are visiting Marvel, they sacrifice the donkey who runs the printing press and use its blood to create possessed Ghost Rider comics that turn the world into a hellscape, making them the ultimate rulers of it using the power of the old gods to do so. Now, Robbie Reyes is trapped in this hellscape world where Hassenwald has dispatched the Marvel Universe and he needs to save it. Number 4. Magneto in cyberspace. From one utterly bonkers story to another. At least this one's a bit better. In What If X-Men, we have a really strange alternate world. A post-apocalyptic one, but one that's gone completely digital, and humanity's mutations lie in their internet connection rather than in their DNA, with mutants having the EXE gene instead of the X gene. This issue follows two very different versions of Domino and Cable as they are tasked by Xavier to rescue Eric, aka Magneto, a digital entrepreneur taken hostage. Except he isn't a good guy. Surprise. No, he is actually masterminding a whole digital coup, but using his powers and Domino, Xavier connects to Eric, takes over his body and mind, and erases him from cyber existence. At least that's what I gathered when I was reading it. I really have no idea what the heck is happening here. It's really strange, but you should definitely check it out. Number 3. Iron Man the Traitor? In one of the first ever What Ifs, when Iron Man is famously captured and forced to create weapons, he still creates the Iron Man armor. But the change comes when instead of booting up and busting his way out of there, he is held captive. The boot up sequence takes too long, and Jensen's sacrifice doesn't buy him enough time. Tony is found and restrained before he can do anything. Now that he has been found and this new weapon, the Iron Man armor, is discovered, the leader of the terror organization, Chen Lu, plants a device in the arc reactor that keeps Tony alive that allows him to shut it off remotely if Tony doesn't do what they say. And he implants a communication device in Tony's skull so that Chen Lu can spy on and control Tony. Then he lets him be discovered and he goes back to being like normal Tony Stark. But thanks to the fact that he can now control Tony, he forces him to become a hero, like he would have anyways, gain the trust of the superhero community, and then learn secrets pertaining to S.H.I.E.L.D. But it's once Tony is ordered to dispatch Reed Richards and goes to complete the mission that it's revealed that Tony had been recording a tape by speaking incredibly slowly, and he sent that tape to Reed, who, when he played it at a faster speed, learned of the situation Iron Man was in. So once their fight began, Iron Man eventually got incapacitated by Reed, who actually helped him remove the device inside Tony's heart, giving Tony the chance to get his revenge. It's kind of a weird way of doing that. Number 2. New Fantastic Four. What If This Was the Fantastic Four is a comic that was a tribute to illustrator Mike Wieringo, who unexpectedly passed away while working on this story. And even if that wasn't the case, it is still one of my favorite what ifs. The original Fantastic Four is brought to an end by the Skrull agent Delilah, and in their place, a team of 4 heroes step up to the plate, if not with a bit of reluctance. Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Ben Grimm was the only member of the original team who survived, and at their funeral, he gave this new team his blessing while he went off to raise Franklin Richards. This new team came under attack from cosmic beings who seemed to sense the Earth losing one of its major teams. But this was all orchestrated by Dr. Doom, as I'm sure no one is surprised by. Thanks to Ghost Rider's inclusion on the team though, Mephisto uses Doom and possesses him, and creates a team of the hero's villains who are power boosted with infernal magic. So Venom, Abomination, Sabretooth, and Sandman. This fearsome four, as they call themselves, do battle with the new team, eventually being defeated, revealing the Mephisto-possessed Doom, who almost destroys the team until he is stopped by a combined effort of the citizens of New York and Spider-Man utilizing the Disruptor that finish off the Fantastic Four to save the people of New York, Dr. Doom, and the day. Nice. Number 1. Thanos. Okay, so bear with me here. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Using the Gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible father from the past to show him the things he has done in an attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never had and still doesn't honestly. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little sadder given the fact that it was his fault Norman even turned out this way in the first place. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out exactly what has happened here, it's revealed that Thanos is the one who's done it, and he's shown up to collect the gauntlet. Thanos is incredibly awesome, but unfortunately, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he tells Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who will never give it to him. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Norman loses his mind, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space, which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox, and he and this world he created fade into emptiness. So yes, Thanos is the hero here in a very weird roundabout way.
Number 10. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces, and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy, and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good, which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 9. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. Colonel Bruce Banner. What if Bruce Banner was actually the monster and Hulk was just purely the good guy? Well, that is the question we dive into in issue 91 of the 1989 series. Here, Bruce Banner mistreats his wife, Betty Ross, who eventually becomes, of course, Betty Banner. Bruce is cruel and unkind, but after he is involved in a gamma radiation explosion, another half of him emerges, a glowing green, light-like figure who is gentle and kind and we know as Starman. Basically, this world's Hulk. And who is actually terrified of Bruce himself. Not only is this villain pretty interesting, unique, and strange, but the story is also like epically sad. Despite Betty reaching out for help to both her father and others around her, it seems that no one actually really believes Betty when it comes to the fact that Bruce mistreats her. In the end, she is confined to a mental institution as she is believed to have gone insane. But at least there she appears to be safe from Bruce and his cruelty, so it's like a sad but I guess sort of happy ending. It's bittersweet is what it is. Ugh. Number 6. Mr. Fantastic. So, Mr. Fantastic in this story is still Reed Richards, but he's also Doctor Doom. Let me explain. In issue number 6 of the 1997 What If series, we get to explore an alternate world where the Fantastic Four were granted different powers. These powers seem to have been inspired more by their personality traits. As such, Reed Richards becomes a big brain. Literally, he's just a brain. Instead of him staying as a big disembodied brain though, with mental or psionic capacities, if you will, he ends up being convinced by Dr. Doom to go with him so that Doom might help him by using his knowledge of robotics to build him a humanoid body. You know that when Doom is like, please, let me help you, Reed Richards, that's not what's about to happen. In reality, Doom's plan is to use Reed's powerful brain form to power his time travel machine. The Fantastic Four come to save Reed and a battle ensues, eventually resulting in a massive explosion when Doom attempts to activate his machine. Just as the explosion goes off though, Reed manages to use his mental brain powers to move his mind into Doom's body. As a result, Doom, which I assume moves into Reed's brain form, ends up dead, and Reed lives on, but within the scarred body of Dr. Doom. So now it just looks like Doom is leading the FF. Pretty cool, but also pretty weird. Number 5. Space Admiral Von Strucker. In the What If story from issue number 14 of the 1977 series, we answer the question, what if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? Turns out that events would be, as expected, pretty weird. The whole premise is that on this alternate Earth, humans got to space a lot sooner and ended up being pulled into a conflict where they fought against the Baytans. Strucker himself was an admiral. Strucker would end up on the side of humanity but would ultimately betray humankind and Earth to ally himself with the Baytans. He saw an opportunity for Germany, who he was more loyal to than, just Earth in general, even though, Germany's part of Earth, so I feel like maybe an interesting choice on his part. Basically, he believed that if the Baytans took over as their allies, Germany would be in a better place than they were now, so he decided to betray his fellow space soldiers, which actually I guess kinda does make sense considering everything that happened after World War I. Space wars are always fun and weird though, and this story and its antagonists are, of course, no exception. Number 4. Hypnofish. The Hypnofish that appears in What If issue number 1 from the 1977 series is actually a character that has appeared in the main continuity. A character? A type of fish? Whether there is only a single Hypnofish or more than one. This is a character who has only made a few appearances in even the main continuity since their first 616 appearance in 1963 in Fantastic Four issue number 14. But they also appear as Namor the Submariner's villainous ally in the first What If issue, where we answer the question, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? The end result is that Namor successfully uses his Hypnofish friend to kidnap Sue Storm, but instead of being rescued as she was in issue number 14 of FF, she ends up staying with Namor and ultimately becoming his queen, all because Spider-Man is on the team, which leaves her kind of feeling like isolated from them. In the end, his Hypnofish and Mentofish plot is successful, and Sue chooses to remain with Namor. Also, yes, there are also Mentofish. That's a thing too. An even more rare thing than Hypnofish, I believe. Number 3. Loki, Prince of Jotunheim. Another one of my favorite episodes from Marvel's and Disney Plus's What If series, for just how lighthearted and adorable it was one that asked the question, what if Thor were an only child? The answer was that Thor would basically be kind of a well-loved brat who was obsessed with partying as opposed to heroics. Not only did we get Party Thor in this episode though, we also got friendly frost giant Loki, who is also known of course as the Prince of Jotunheim. Instead of Loki being adopted by Odin and growing up to be the villain we normally know him as, the sort of jealous and vengeful brother of Thor, he becomes Thor's best friend and ally, who also seems to enjoy a good party. And I gotta say, I kinda love it. Super weird and super great. Number 2. Galactus. Galactus is a pretty complex character. Sometimes he's a villain, at times he's been a hero. Currently, I'm pretty sure in the main continuity he's dead and his corpse is maybe being used as part of Thor's throne room, but either way, when it comes down to it, despite being a cosmic inevitability, Galactus often threatens entire worlds with his hunger, which, it feels pretty villainous. And yet even he can end up with a happy ending where he gets to enjoy the simple life. All it takes is for Thanos to use the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe his mind and send him to Earth to live as a human. Hey, it's so easy. In this story, this attempt to neutralize Galactus results in him being recognized, despite his amnesia, as Elvis. This is because Galen in his human form happens to sound and look just like Elvis, coincidentally. When Adam Warlock finds him after defeating Thanos and offers to return Galactus to his prior form and power, he actually refuses and decides to live out his days on Earth with his new partner Gertrude and her son, basically filling in as the planet's, Elvis replacement following the mysterious death of the real Elvis. Which, I mean, fair enough. I mean, if I came to Earth and then people thought I was Elvis, I'd probably be like, you know what, I think I'm good. I'll just chill here. This is a pretty good life. Number 1. Juggernaut. In this bizarre what if issue, we ask the question, what if Professor X of the X-Men had become the Juggernaut? Which is a strange question and is also a great question. Obviously, instead of his brother Kane Marco. Obviously, who is normally the Juggernaut. This story takes place in the pages of issue 13 of the 1989 What If series. Here we see that Professor X is trapped under the rubble of the caved-in tomb where Cyttorak's gem awaited an avatar. So Charles becomes the avatar of Cyttorak and not only gains great physical power, but has his psychic mutant power basically increased as well. Because he was not around to form the X-Men, the Fantastic Four fight against Magneto in their place, which causes anti-mutant hysteria as a result. In response, when Juggernaut surfaces, he creates his own team of mutants to enforce anti-human laws in response. Woo! Becoming a powerful villain as opposed to friend and ally of humankind. Would have gone a lot differently.